The creature that washed up in Anchor's Hollow. Chapter 1. After the storm. The storm had torn the sea in half. Jonas Harper stood at the edge of the beach, boots half sunk in wet sand, the wind still gnawing at his jacket as if the storm hadn't quite let go. Behind him, the shattered remnants of Anchor's Hollow clung to the coastline like old barnacles, roofs ripped open, boats flipped like toys, and power lines draped over the street like dead vines. But none of that mattered. Not compared to the thing that had washed up with the tide. It wasn't a whale. Everyone in town had seen whales. It wasn't a shark, or an orca, or even some deep-sea leviathan like in the books his father used to read him when he was young. It was wrong. Wrong in size. Wrong in shape. Wrong in presence. It lay there immense and dark, the color of rotted velvet stretched over smooth bone. It had no eyes that Jonas could see, but the longer he stared, the more he felt watched, felt remembered. As though the thing on the beach had already known him long before the tide brought it here. Behind the makeshift barricade of yellow tape and wooden stakes, the townsfolk had gathered in silence. No murmurs. No laughter. Just the low whistle of the wind and the distant moan of gulls circling above but never landing. Even the birds wouldn't touch it. Jesus Christ, murmured Officer Redmond beside him, breath fogging in the cold air. What the hell is that thing? Jonas didn't answer. He couldn't. Something pulsed beneath the surface of the thing. A twitch, like breath in a corpse. The skin bulged, then sank again. Alive. Or pretending. The town council had already called the Coast Guard, but the signal towers were still down. No radio. No cell service. Only one thing was clear. Whatever this was, it wasn't supposed to be here. And it wanted to stay. Hours later, Jonas lay in bed that night, unable to sleep. The image of that thing was branded into his eyelids. Every time he blinked, he saw it again, the curve of its hide, the slick sheen that looked more like oil than skin, the strange lines carved into its flank. Not natural lines, not from rocks or tide. More like writing. Old writing. Curved and coiled, like it belonged in a cathedral buried beneath the sea. At some point, he must have drifted off. But the dreams came immediately. He was standing in the surf, knee-deep, salt in his lungs. The sky above was black, not night, but something worse. Stars blinked in formations he didn't recognize. Shapes moved in the water. Voices spoke in languages that weren't made for human mouths. And rising from the depths below, larger than anything the earth had ever known, came the sound. Not a roar. Not a cry. But a call. A calling meant for something ancient. Something waiting. He awoke choking, sweat-drenched, fingernails digging into his palms so deep he left blood on his sheets. From outside, in the distance, came a sound he would later swear wasn't the wind. A wet, gurgling moan, followed by the crunch of something dragging across the sand. The following morning, Jonas avoided the beach, which was easier said than done in a town that was the beach. Anchor's Hollow wrapped itself along the coast like a spine of cracked vertebrae, narrow streets, sea-weathered homes, a single gas station, and the briny smell of fish that never truly left your skin. There were no back roads to hide on. No alleyways to slink through. Only the straight line from his house to the general store, and the looming knowledge that somewhere, just beyond the dunes, it was still there. Except, no one seemed to be talking about it. The school was closed for storm damage. But the radio station, broadcasting on a backup generator, was playing old country songs, not emergency updates. No warning bulletins. No news. No Coast Guard helicopters overhead. Just the same twangy voice singing about broken hearts and cheap whiskey on a loop. It was like the town had decided, collectively, not to speak of it. Jonas walked into the store, greeted by the smell of stale bread and diesel. Behind the counter, Marla Hemsley, who ran the place since her husband died in the last hurricane, gave him a nod. She was always sharp-eyed, but today she seemed dulled. Slower. Like her brain was being pulled through thick syrup. "Storm knock out your fridge, Marla?" he asked, noting the soft hum had vanished. She blinked slowly. "Don't remember." "Must have." "You okay?" Her lips twitched, like she was trying to smile and couldn't quite remember how. "Oh, I'm fine, dear. Just tired. Strange dreams last night." Jonas froze. What kind of dreams? Her gaze drifted past him, to the shop's front window. The ocean. Talking. Like it was calling someone's name. He left without buying anything. Outside, a fog had rolled in off the water, thick as milk and strangely warm. His skin prickled as he stepped into it, like walking into the breath of something sleeping beneath the sand. He wasn't alone on the street. Near the dock, a man stood barefoot in the mist, shirtless despite the chill, head tilted back like he was listening. Jonas recognized him, Mr. Keene, the middle school janitor. A quiet, sober man. But now, Keene was smiling and humming. A tune that was wrong, no melody, no rhythm, just a warbling repetition of notes that didn't quite match any scale Jonas knew. He didn't look at Jonas as he passed. Didn't even blink. That night, Jonas didn't sleep. The dreams were worse. This time, he stood on the beach. Alone. But he wasn't in his own body. He was the sand, the dunes, the stones. He could feel things crawling beneath him, squirming like worms inside flesh. Something massive shifted in the depths below, stretching like it had been asleep for centuries. In the distance, a sound echoed, a cry that came from everywhere and nowhere. A language carved into the bones of the earth. A voice that wasn't a voice, but 1,000 dead things whispering through the centuries. And then, the beach cracked open like a wound, and an eye blinked up at him. It had no pupil, no white, only a deep, diamond-shaped iris that shimmered with black, crimson, and violet. It filled the dream. It filled everything. Jonas bolted upright, mouth full of sand. He scrambled out of bed, coughing violently, spitting up wet clumps of grainy salt. The floor around him was damp, soaked through with seawater. His hand shook as he switched on the bedside lamp, only to find a trail of wet footprints leading from the window to his bed. But the window was locked, and no one else had been in the house. He was sure of it. Almost sure. The council meeting. The next day, Jonas's father, Walter Harper, came back from the docks with a pale face and trembling hands. "They're holding a meeting at town hall," he said, voice brittle. "Whole council's called in." "About the thing?" He flinched. "Don't say that. Don't call it anything." Jonas stared. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Walter didn't answer at first. He simply sat at the kitchen table, staring at his cracked fingernails, until finally he said, "It's not dead. I don't care what the others say." That afternoon, the town's modest hall filled with every able-bodied resident. Fishermen, housewives, the old reverend, even the 2 teenage girls from the vape shop. They all gathered under the buzz of flickering fluorescent lights in the gaze of a taxidermied marlin mounted above the podium. Mayor Caldwell stepped forward. He looked as if he hadn't slept in days. "We are aware of the situation on the beach," he began. Situation. That word. As if naming it might give it more power. "Until state assistance arrives," he continued, "the beach will remain restricted. Anyone caught tampering with or photographing the site will be fined. Or worse." A murmur went through the crowd. Then, a voice rang out. "What is it, exactly?" It came from Mr. Cartwright, a biology teacher. The mayor didn't answer. Another voice. "It moved last night. My son saw it breathing." And another. "There's mold in my house. I clean it, and it comes back black. Voices in my drains. My dog won't stop barking at the tub." The crowd began to ripple. Nervous. Scared. Mayor Caldwell raised a hand. "That will be all. Go home. Lock your doors." And then he added, "Do not go near the shore." Jonas didn't sleep that night either. But when he looked out the window at 2:43 a.m., he saw a dozen people standing barefoot in the street, all facing the same direction, toward the water. None of them moved. And none of them had eyes anymore. By morning, they were gone. The dozen eyeless figures that Jonas had seen in the street the night before had vanished without a trace. No wet footprints. No signs of sleepwalking. Just the faint lingering scent of brine and something else, metallic, like blood left too long in the sun. Jonas tried telling his father. Walter didn't respond at first. He just sat at the kitchen table, cigarette burning untouched between his fingers, the ash growing long and tremulous. The only sign he'd heard anything was the slight tightening of his jaw. "They're just rumors," he finally said. "I saw them," Jonas snapped. They were standing there, staring at the sea. Their eyes were gone. His father exhaled, the cigarette forgotten entirely now. "It's the storm," he murmured. "Messes with people. With balance. Seen it happen before. Just don't go back to the beach." Jonas slammed his hand on the table. "It's not the storm." Silence fell. And in the quiet, he realized something that hadn't occurred to him until now. The birds were still gone. Not a gull. Not a crow. Not a single damn pigeon in the sky. At the library. The town library sat mostly untouched by the storm. Tucked into the hollow behind the old post office, it was a squat brick building smelling of mildew and forgotten donations. Jonas went there not for books, but for Lucy Rowe. She was sitting in her usual spot by the microfilm machine, her black hoodie pulled over her head, a thermos of black coffee steaming beside her. Her family ran the candle shop on Anchor Street, And she was known as the weird girl, the kind who read about ley lines and talked to herself in Latin under her breath. "Jonas," she said without looking up. "You saw it too, didn't you?" He froze. "What?" She finally turned. Her eyes were bloodshot. "Don't pretend. You've got that look." "What look?" She pointed at his face. "Like something old has touched you. Something that never had hands to begin with." Jonas sat down. "I think it's alive," he whispered. Lucy nodded slowly. "It is. But that's not the worst part." He leaned in. "What is?" She looked him dead in the eye. It called out. She pulled a yellowed book from her bag. The leather was cracked and brittle, bound in twine, with no title on the spine. "My great-grandmother wrote this during the 1924 tide surge," Lucy explained. "She said the ocean coughed something up back then, too. Not a whale. Not even something animal." Jonas flipped through the pages. The drawings made his stomach churn. Shapes that bend in unnatural ways, circles inside of circles, mouths with no teeth, eyes with no face. In one entry, Lucy's ancestor described hearing a frequency, a low sound that only certain people could hear. Jonas stiffened. He'd heard it too, in the night. A throbbing hum beneath his floorboards. "Look at this," Lucy said, turning to a folded map near the back of the book. Anchor's Hollow sits right on a convergence point. Not just of ley lines, but faults. Thin spots. Places where things leak through. Jonas stared at the map. The town was a dot. The shoreline a jagged smear. And drawn just offshore, in faint, desperate ink. "Do not wake the deep house." That evening, Jonas couldn't shake the words. The deep house. It echoed in his thoughts like a mantra. Every wave crash, every creak of the pipes in the walls sounded like something whispering it back to him. It wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't myth. It was real. And it was waking up. That night, he left a note for his father and slipped out the back door with a flashlight, his boots, and Lucy's borrowed journal. The moon was gone. The fog had returned, thicker than before. It swirled around his legs like grasping fingers, and he had to rely on the crunch of the gravel path to keep himself oriented. When he reached the dunes, the fog parted just enough for him to see the shore. And the thing, it had changed. The surface had split open along its side. Not like decomposition. More like a birth. The meat peeled back in symmetrical flaps. Something shaped like ribs jutted outwards from the interior. And there was movement. Slow. Deliberate. Jonas crouched low and watched. A silhouette stood beside the body, someone in a black coat, wearing a gas mask. The figure was dragging a large burlap sack from a cart. The sack twitched. Jonas's stomach turned. A person. A living person. The masked figure bent down beside the opening and pulled the flap back. Something inside stirred. It reached out, a wet, pale arm with too many joints, ending in claws. It gently took the sack and drew it inward. Then the flap closed like a wound healing. Jonas felt bile rise in his throat. He turned to run and stepped on a rock. The crack echoed loud as a gunshot. The figure turned sharply, head tilting. Then it raised an arm and pointed directly at him. Jonas bolted. He didn't stop until he was halfway home, lungs burning, tears streaking his face from the cold. Behind him, the fog swallowed everything, but he could feel it pressing closer, like the tide was coming in, not with water, but with something else entirely. Jonas didn't tell his father what he saw on the beach. How could he? How could he describe the arm, that thing, reaching from the open side of the creature, how it moved like muscle peeled from bone, and how it cradled the burlap sack like an offering? How the person in the gas mask never spoke, only watched with an unnatural stillness. He hadn't just seen something that night. He had been seen back. And now, something was different. Something was following him. 3 days later. It began with the walls. Hairline cracks appeared in the corners of his room, running jagged along the ceiling and creeping down like veins. But no one else seemed to notice them. Jonas's father thought it was water damage from the storm. The plumber they called didn't show up. And then came the buzzing. At first, it was faint, like electricity humming just beyond hearing. But it grew each night, settling deep in his skull like a swarm of bees building a hive in his brain. Jonas covered his ears. It didn't help. He heard it even in his teeth. Lucy didn't pick up her phone. Her shop was closed. Windows papered over. Candles burned on the doorstep. Black wax melted into strange spiral patterns that pooled like oil. On the third night, he found a note slipped under his door. Jonas, if it's following you too, we need to go to the cliffs. Tonight. Bring the book. L. The cliffs. The cliffs north of town had once been part of an old military outpost, Back during World War II, when rumors of submarines creeping along the Pacific coast turned every fisherman into a lookout. Now, it was just ruins and rust, swallowed by moss and fog. Lucy was already there when Jonas arrived, standing near the crumbled edge of a concrete watchtower. She looked worse than before. Her eyes were ringed with shadows, her lips cracked and dry. "You brought it?" she asked without turning. He handed her the book. Lucy opened to the map and pointed. "This is the deep house." She traced a spot just beyond the sandbar, out past where the creature had first washed up. "It's not a building. It's not even a place, really. It's a fracture. A space between things. A womb. A womb," Jonas repeated. Lucy's voice dropped. "It was waiting, and we fed it." Jonas's blood ran cold. "We. Not us," she said. "The town. They've always known, Jonas. Why do you think Anchor's Hollow isn't on most maps? Why the population never grows? Why so many kids leave and never come back?" He stared at her. "I used to think my family was cursed," she whispered. "Now I know we were just witnesses." Midnight. They walked the path to the overlook in silence. The fog below glowed faintly green, pulsing in time with the ocean's roar. But there was no wind, no salt in the air. Just stillness, as though time itself was holding its breath. Far out at sea, something glowed beneath the surface. It looked like a structure, stone columns reaching from the depths, ringed in concentric circles, each one covered in a lattice of veins. And from that shape, something rose. Jonas couldn't see its full form. Only fragments, a curve of spines, a gaping mouth, eyes like tunnels. Something older than the ocean, pushing itself closer to the shore. Lucy dropped to her knees. "She's coming," she whispered. "She's been dreaming." And we woke her up. Jonas stepped back. No, we have to stop it." Lucy looked up at him, eyes wide. "You can't stop a birth." And then she pulled a knife from her coat and cut deep into her palm. Jonas lunged. "What are you doing?" She smeared her blood across the pages of the journal, chanting low in a language he didn't recognize, something wet and gurgling, as if shaped by a mouth filled with water. Below, the glow intensified. The sea parted, and a shape unlike anything in nature began to crawl toward shore. The next morning, Jonas woke on the beach. His head throbbed. His mouth tasted of salt and copper. The cliffs were gone. Not destroyed, gone. The watchtower, the rocks, Lucy, nothing remained but flat sand and sea foam. The sky was red with morning. In the distance, the creature's carcass remained. But it was hollow now, like something had crawled out of it. The sand around it was blackened, burnt, and etched in the ground, deep enough to scrape stone, were symbols he had seen in Lucy's book. The deep house is open. Jonas didn't go home. He wandered the shoreline until the sun rose fully, casting long shadows across the dunes like the arms of something dead reaching inland. His clothes were soaked, stiff with brine, and the soles of his boots were lined with tiny cuts, as if the sand itself had turned to broken glass. Anchor's Hollow looked different in daylight. It was subtle, windows boarded over that hadn't been yesterday, stores left open and abandoned, mailboxes overflowing. A silence hung over everything, deeper than stillness. It was expectation. Jonas reached the old diner on Harbor Street, hoping for signs of life. Inside, he found bodies. Not dead, not fully. They sat in booths, backs rigid, heads tilted upward like they were waiting for some signal from above. Their eyes were milky, unfocused, and their skin glistened faintly, as if a thin film of seawater coated every inch. A low murmur filled the room, dozens of voices repeating a single word in unison. Jonas stepped closer, breath caught in his throat. The word was, "Open." Lucy's candle. That night, Jonas returned to Lucy's candle shop. He had no idea why. Only that he couldn't stand being in his own house, not with the walls creaking like lungs. He expected the place to be dark, empty, but a single candle burned on the counter, black wax with a green flame. The room smelled of salt and lavender, and something coppery beneath it. On the wall behind the register, someone had scratched a message into the plaster. "You cannot close what was born." Beneath it lay Lucy's journal. Jonas picked it up carefully. The cover was damp. He turned to the most recent entry. "I saw her face. She is not a god. She is not a beast. She is the memory of the first hunger that ever existed." Dusk. The fog came early that day. By 4 p.m., the sun was gone. The streets were shadowed. The clouds above spun in slow circles like something vast was turning in the sky. Jonas saw them again. People walking barefoot, eyes white, faces slack. They moved in slow, deliberate lines toward the beach. Not in groups. Not in chaos. In procession. From the windows of his house, he watched his neighbors step silently into the street. Mr. Keene, the mailman, a girl from his science class, even his father, moving like he was asleep but being pulled by invisible strings. They all walked toward the shoreline. Jonas grabbed a flashlight and followed. The gathering. The beach was full of people. Hundreds. Standing silently. All facing the same direction, toward the waves. The sand was cold and slick. The air filled with the scent of copper and salt and something burning. Jonas felt it deep in his bones. The hum, like a chorus sung beneath the surface of the earth. A wind blew in from the sea. But it didn't chill him. It whispered. And when he looked out into the surf, he saw shapes. Tall, spindly things with 2 long limbs and no mouths. Their skin was translucent, and inside them pulsed black veins like roots. They stood just offshore, unmoving. Watching. One of the townspeople, a woman Jonas didn't recognize, stepped forward and walked into the ocean. She didn't swim. She just walked. And when the water should have covered her mouth, she kept walking. When it should have drowned her, she kept going. And the sea swallowed her whole without a ripple. The truth beneath. Jonas ran. He stumbled up the dunes, back toward the cliffs where Lucy had vanished. He didn't know what he was searching for. Hope. A weapon? A way to undo this? Instead, he found the hole. It hadn't been there before. A black pit in the earth, wide as a house and deeper than any cave. From within it came a windless cold and a sound like breathing. The walls pulsed, as if made of muscle and bone. Something moved inside. Jonas approached slowly, against every instinct. He stared into the pit, and the pit stared back. He fell, or perhaps he was pulled. Below, he woke in darkness. The air was thick, wet, and hummed with a noise too deep for ears. The ground beneath him was soft and spongy. Every surface seemed to pulse, and overhead, there were stars, but not from this sky. Not from any sky. A voice spoke in his mind. You were the first to see. You will be the last to speak. Then a shape emerged. Not walking, not crawling, unfolding. A mass of limbs, of mouths, of eyes that stared without blinking. It had no form, or too many. Its skin was made of memory, and it wore faces like masks. His father's face, Lucy's, his own. Jonas screamed, but the sound did not echo. And then the deep house opened wider. Jonas didn't know how long he'd been falling. Time had no meaning here. There were no walls, no floor, no light. Only the sensation of being swallowed. Of sliding down a throat made not of muscle or tissue, but of memory. Of grief. Of ancient hunger that predated the sea itself. His body ached. His thoughts flickered. He couldn't even remember his own name for a moment, as if the very act of being was dissolving into the black around him. And then, suddenly, he landed. Softly. On something that breathed. The interior. He stood slowly. The surface beneath his feet was warm. Wet. It pulsed with a faint rhythm, not like a heartbeat, but like waves. The air smelled of old blood, salt, and burning wax. Above him, veins ran like rivers across a ceiling made of translucent meat, glowing faintly with a reddish light that came from nowhere. Jonas turned in place. All around him were columns, stretching into the dark, not built, but grown. Fleshy, organic spires that twitched at his approach. Some bore marks, symbols etched deep, in languages he couldn't read but somehow understood. Welcome, first witness. This house remembers. You belong to the womb of the deep. He walked, not because he knew where to go, but because something inside him compelled him forward, like a magnet being pulled toward an unknown source. The nursery. He came to a room, or something like a room. A dome-shaped chamber where the floor was a thin membrane, stretched over something alive. Shapes moved beneath it, humanoid, but unfinished. Twisting, growing. Their faces blurred and eyeless, their limbs long and twitching like newborn spiders. They floated in a thick amber fluid beneath the membrane, pressing upward as if trying to breach the surface. One of them had Lucy's face. Another had his own. Jonas staggered back. That was when he heard the whispering. Dozens of voices speaking in unison, but inside his head. They came from the walls, the floor, the unborn things beneath his feet. You brought her food. You brought her knowledge. Now you must bring her form. No, Jonas gasped. No, I didn't. I didn't bring anything. You came. That is enough. The Hall of Mouths. Jonas ran. The corridors pulsed as he passed, and he could feel something following, not with footsteps, but with thoughts. Memories that weren't his clawed their way into his mind. A child lost at sea in 1872, calling for his mother as black waves closed over his face. A lighthouse keeper in 1911, alone and weeping as something knocked on the walls from inside the rock. A woman in 1946, standing on the beach, pregnant with something that twisted inside her belly like eels. Every memory made Jonas scream. Every scream made the deep house deeper. He stumbled into a long corridor and froze. The walls here were made of mouths. Dozens. Hundreds. Gaping, toothless mouths that breathed in tandem. Some whispered. Some sang. Some moaned in ecstasy or terror. He couldn't tell which. One of them, his mother's mouth, opened wide and said, "There is no surface." There never was. And from far down the corridor, something began to crawl toward him. Revelation. Jonas collapsed. He curled into himself, tears burning hot on his cheeks. "Please," he whispered, "just let me wake up." From the shadows ahead, something stirred. And then, a voice. Not spoken, not heard, but understood. This is the waking. All else was the dream. A shape emerged. It was not the creature from the beach. It was not a god, nor a demon, nor a beast. It was a wound, a living gash in the world, stitched together from things long dead and never born. Eyes blinked across its skin. Fingers reached out from its sides and folded back into its own chest. And when it opened its mouth, the deep house spoke. "You have seen the nursery. You have heard the memory. Now you must choose. Become a vessel, or become a door." Jonas screamed, and the scream didn't stop, because now he could feel it, deep in his chest, something stirring inside him, scratching beneath his ribs. Not a parasite, not a voice, but an invitation. Above, back in Anchor's Hollow, the sky turned black at noon. The townspeople lined the beach, eyes upturned, smiling. Their mouths opened wide, wider than they should have, and from each throat came a single note, deep and pure and impossibly old. The carcass on the beach had collapsed, but from its husk now stood a spire grown of bone and flesh, taller than any house, covered in twitching runes. And atop it, a door, pulsing, waiting. Jonas no longer remembered the color of the sky. He no longer remembered what day it was, or whether he was still breathing in the way human beings do. Time had stretched in every direction. The deep house had no clocks, no walls, no mercy. It only had intention. And now it was inside him, vessel or door. He was floating, or at least, that's what it felt like. Suspended in a void of flesh and light, where the heartbeat of something bigger than God's pulsed like a drum inside his skull. The choice echoed through him again. Become a vessel, or become a door. He understood now. To be a vessel was to carry her voice, to speak her dreams to the world, to become a prophet of things that crawl from salt and rot. He would not be himself anymore, just a shell with eyes, spreading her song across the earth. To be a door, though, that was worse. It meant to be opened, to be broken, to become a point of entry for the deep house to stretch beyond the shoreline, into forests, cities, skies, to let her in. He screamed again, but there was no sound in that place, only vibration, and the mouths and the walls sang back to him. Choose, child. The sea does not wait. Anchor's Hollow. Above, the town was shifting. The sand had bled inward, flooding the streets. Roads had buckled, turning into slick, spiraling pits. The houses now stood half-consumed, with walls that pulsed like lungs and windows that blinked like eyes. People no longer spoke with words. They murmured in harmonics. Those who had once been Jonas's neighbors now stood with necks elongated, jaws unhinged, and skin turning the color of dead coral. They stood at the beach in rows, gazing up at the bone spire, a tower that had grown from the carcass, stretching into the heavens like a spinal column carved from regret. At the top, the door. It pulsed. It breathed. And it waited. The memory garden. Within the deep house, Jonas was led by a figure robed in kelp and bone. It had no face, only a mask, carved from driftwood and slick with mucus. Its hands were backward. It walked without touching the ground. It brought him to the memory garden, a cavern of infinite mirrors, where each reflection was not his own, but another version of himself, living in other timelines, other realities. In one, he had never left the beach, and now stood with the others, smiling at the sky. In another, he had died as a child, drowned in a fishing net before he could ever grow teeth. In another, he was her, or part of her, the womb that remembers, the she-thing beneath the sand. The robed figure pointed to the final mirror. Jonas stepped forward, and it didn't show him. It showed the future. Anchor's Hollow swallowed by an endless tide of black water. Cities drowned. Mountains reshaped. The moon cracking open like an egg, revealing a thing beneath its crust that had been sleeping for epochs. This is what happens, the mask whispered, if you open the door. This is what happens, it added, if you say nothing. The climb. Jonas awoke at the base of the spire. The world above was no longer the world he knew. The sea had pulled back far beyond the horizon, revealing a valley of ancient ruins beneath the waterline. Stone monoliths, carved with spirals, leaned like crooked teeth in a fossilized jaw. The people of Anchor's Hollow now chanted in unison. Make way for the coming mouth. Make way for the wound reborn. Make way for the door. Jonas, body trembling, began to climb the spire. Each step felt like sinking through time. Visions clung to the walls, births and deaths, rituals and drownings, children given to the tide, all blinking past him like fish in deep water. At the top, the door. It was neither metal nor wood. It was organic, a mass of stretched skin, rib-boned hinges, and a central eye that opened as he approached. You must choose, came the voice once more. Now, while your soul is still your own. Jonas stared. Behind the door, he felt her. The original mother. The first current. She who sleeps between dimensions. She who had tasted gods and found them wanting. He reached out. The moment. Below, the crowd began to chant louder. The spire shuddered. The waves reversed. Clouds formed spirals in the sky like cosmic whirlpools, and something enormous shifted beneath the earth. Jonas's hand touched the door, and it opened. Just slightly. Enough for a wind to escape, one that was not air, but memory. The wind hit the crowd below, and in an instant, they were gone. Not dead. Not vanished. Rewritten. Their bodies twisted, grew gills, turned translucent. Some crawled back toward the sea. Others simply sank into the ground as if returning to the source. The spire cracked. Jonas fell to his knees. And then silence. The return. He woke up 3 days later. On the beach. Alone. The spire was gone. The sand was dry. The town was silent once more. But it was no longer Anchor's Hollow. The buildings were unfamiliar. The air was too still. There were no birds. His phone had no signal. There was no record of a storm. The beach was clean. But in his palm, he still held a piece of the door, a sliver of bone that throbbed when held too long. He walked into the empty town. And somewhere, beneath the ground, beneath the water, the deep house whispered one final promise. There are other shores, other hollows, other doors yet to open. The town had no name. Jonas walked its empty streets beneath a sky that didn't feel real. The clouds above hung motionless, as if painted on, and the sun, if that pale white orb was the sun, never moved. No wind stirred. No insects buzzed. The only sound was his own footsteps, echoing too loudly on the asphalt. This wasn't Anchor's Hollow. Not anymore. He passed buildings that looked familiar but weren't. A diner with his name scrawled backward on the window. A post office with no doors. A church where the cross above the steeple had been replaced with a curling spiral of bone. The town was empty, yes. But it wasn't abandoned. Something was still here. And it was listening. The static tower. He found it on the third day. At the edge of what used to be the town square, a building he didn't recognize. Square, metallic, humming with quiet static. There was no door. Just a ladder leading to the top and a hatch sealed with rusted bolts. The tower pulsed with a signal. Low frequency. Almost musical. Jonas could feel it in his jaw, in his spine. Every step closer made his teeth ache. He climbed. At the top was a console covered in moss, wires, and pale organic cords that pulsed gently like veins. A speaker sat in the middle. It crackled, then clicked. Then, from the speaker, came his own voice. Jonas Harper. If you're hearing this, it means the door opened. It means we failed. Jonas froze. The voice was older. Tired. But undeniably his. You have to listen carefully. They aren't gods. They aren't monsters. They're older than either. They were memories that grew teeth. Ideas that learned to crawl. The signal fizzled, then returned. There's more than one. More than one deep house. Anchor's Hollow was just a crack in the shell. But they're opening everywhere. Anywhere the water touches land. If you're still you, if she hasn't taken your face, get out. Get inland. Find the others. There are still some of us left. We're trying to close the next one before it opens. But time is folding. Space is rotting. They can dream through reflections, through blood, through sound. Don't sleep near running water. Don't speak your name in mirrors. And above all, the message cut. And for a moment, the speaker emitted laughter. Not Jonas's. Something wet, hungry, triumphant. The map. Inside the console was a folded piece of parchment. A map, but not of roads or towns. It showed coastlines, tidal ranges, fault lines. And scattered across them, marked in black ink, were dozens of spirals. Symbols identical to the one carved into the spire's base. At the top of the map, scrawled in frantic handwriting. Known locations of active thresholds. Jonas scanned the points. A fishing village off the coast of Norway. An abandoned oil rig in the Bering Sea. A coral reef in Micronesia. A dried lake bed in Utah. A reservoir near Dalat, Vietnam. More than 30 were marked. Some were circled. 3 had been crossed out with the words. Breached. Irreversible. Anchor's Hollow was among them. The glass man. That night, Jonas saw him. He had made a fire in one of the ruined buildings, using rotted furniture and driftwood. It burned strangely with green flame and a smell like citrus and iron. At some point after midnight, he felt watched. Turning, he saw a figure standing across the street, tall, thin, and made entirely of translucent glass. Inside it, liquid swirled, dark and filled with stars. It had no face, only the impression of one pressed from within, as if something inside the glass wanted out. It raised its hand and pointed at Jonas. Then it shattered, silently. Where it had stood was a message burned into the pavement. It remembers where you go. Inland. Jonas left at dawn. He walked through fields that had once been forest, past lakes where the water stood perfectly still. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. The deep house had changed him. Inside his bones, the tide still moved. Somewhere far ahead, he would find others, those who had heard the signal, who had survived their own awakenings. But even as he walked, he knew the truth. The door hadn't been sealed. It had only paused. And beneath the soil, the roots were already spreading. The man who found Jonas wore a red scarf and carried a knife made from bone. His name was Ezra, and he said very little. They met just past the foothills, near a collapsed overpass that had been swallowed by creeping moss and something that wasn't quite planned. Jonas had been walking for 3 days, no destination, just the slow ache in his skull pulling him forward. Ezra had been waiting by a fire that burned without smoke. Don't drink from the streams, he said. And if the moon looks wrong, keep walking. Jonas said nothing at first. He was too tired, too hollow. But Ezra looked at him, really looked at him, and said, almost gently, "You've seen her." Jonas didn't ask who she was. He just nodded. The refuge. Ezra led him to an old hydroelectric station hidden in a gulch, surrounded by brambles and copper wire strung like a ward. Inside, a dozen others had gathered, pale, worn, paranoid. Some were missing fingers. One woman had no tongue. They didn't ask questions. Just studied Jonas with eyes that had seen too much. This place wasn't a sanctuary. It was a pause. A place between doors. No one here believed they were safe, only that they were less watched. A man named Silas showed Jonas a map etched into the floor with charcoal and rust. It was wider than the one Jonas had found. More symbols. More spirals. Some pulsing with a faint red glow. "We think the spirals aren't just markers," Silas said. "We think they're breathing points. Places where the deep house exhales." Jonas stared. "Exhales what?" Silas looked at him. "Versions of us." The quiet girl. Her name was Mara. She was the youngest in the group, no older than 17. Black hair, hollow voice, and a scar across her throat that looked like it had been carved with claws instead of blades. She spoke rarely, but when she did, people listened. One night, Jonas found her sitting alone in the turbine hall, staring at the stagnant water below. "I heard them whispering," she said. "Who?" "The drowned." Jonas felt his stomach turn. "What did they say?" She turned to him, her eyes strangely still. "That one of us is already open. The night test." Ezra believed in certainty. And when paranoia crept into the group, he proposed a solution. "There's a way to know," he said. "The ones touched by her shadow, they dream when they shouldn't." He pulled out a shard of polished obsidian, shaped like a teardrop. "Each of us sleeps with this under the tongue," he said. "If you dream, we know." Jonas hesitated. He had already dreamed too much. What would the deep house do if he allowed it back in? But when the shard was passed to him, he nodded and accepted it. That night, Under the hum of dying generators and the moan of wind through broken vents, Jonas closed his eyes. And the darkness opened. The dream. He stood in a town that was not Anchor's Hollow but could have been. The buildings swayed like seaweed. The roads bent like tendons. Above, the sky was stitched shut with spirals of light and bone. And from the center of the town rose a new door. This one made of faces. His own. Lucy's. Ezra's. Mara's. All repeating the same whisper. She is behind the second veil now. She is learning how to walk. And one of you will teach her to speak. Jonas turned. Behind him stood Mara. Her eyes were black. Her mouth was open wide. And she smiled with someone else's teeth. The morning. He woke in sweat. The shard was gone. Ezra and the others were already gathered in the mess hall, whispering. Silas looked pale, trembling. One of the group, a man named Bishop, hadn't woken up. He had clawed his own chest open in the night. Ezra held the shard. It was under his tongue, he said. But Jonas knew the truth. The shard had been moved. Someone wanted to point the blame elsewhere. Jonas looked across the group, his eyes finally landing on Mara, who stood calmly, hands clasped, a soft hum rising from her lips. The same three-note pattern he'd heard in the deep house. She is behind the second veil now. She is learning how to walk. There are silences that feel like the breath before a scream. That was the silence inside the hydro station. Since Bishop's death, no one spoke unless necessary. Meals were eaten without eye contact. Sleep became rare. Whispers echoed in corners where no mouths moved. And always, Jonas could hear it. That same low, cycling hum. 3 notes. Calling. Listening. Becoming. And Mara, she smiled too often now. Not a happy smile, but one of rehearsal. As though she were learning how to wear a face that was never hers to begin with. The blood test. Ezra knew it couldn't go on. We can't guess anymore, he said on the third night. The shard is no longer enough. He held up a small vial of thick red liquid. Blood. His own. Real bodies bleed, he said, looking around the circle. Real blood clots. If something's wearing a skin suit, we'll know. Jonas saw the fear in the others, not of being tested, but of what might bleed wrong. Mara didn't flinch. She held out her hand first. Let's get it over with. Ezra made a small cut along her palm. Jonas held his breath. Red. Normal. Warm. But something felt off. The blood didn't drip. It slithered. Moved upward for a moment, against gravity, like a curious worm before snapping back into a droplet and falling. Ezra blinked. Said nothing. Then motioned to the next. What the walls remember. That night, Jonas couldn't sleep. He walked the dark halls of the turbine level, flashlight dying, until he reached the sealed generator room, long abandoned, used now only for storage. But something drew him there. A smell. Not rot. Not ozone. Tidewater and something sweet. The room was colder than the rest of the station. His breath fogged in the air. He opened the door slowly, stepped inside, and saw writing, carved into the walls, into the metal, into the bones of the room itself. She sleeps in speech. Her voice is made of us. Every time you dream, you speak her name. On the far wall, someone had traced an outline in black mold, a door with 1,000 fingers reaching from its edges. At its center was a single eye, drawn in blood. It blinked. The second Mara. Jonas ran. His legs moved before his mind could catch up, panic rising like fire in his lungs. He burst into the dormitory wing, down the corridor, and pushed open the curtain where Mara slept. She was there, asleep. But the room smelled wrong, like the generator room, like the beach. And then she opened her eyes. Jonas, she whispered, sitting up slowly. You look like you've seen something. Her smile was soft, measured, but her eyes were too black, too wide, reflective. She looked like Mara. She spoke like Mara. But Jonas knew. This was not Mara. He backed away, but from behind him, another voice whispered, Don't look at her too long. You'll become what she sees. Jonas turned. Mara stood behind him. The real Mara. 2 of them. And both were smiling now. The breach. Screams tore through the station. Silas ran into the hallway, clutching his stomach. His skin was peeling, coming off in strips like wet paper. It's not her. He shrieked. It's all of us. She's inside us. Behind him, the walls began to pulse. Veins bloomed along the concrete. The turbine hall lit up with an unnatural glow, pale green, flickering like a heartbeat. And from the depths below, from the sealed pipes and submerged ducts, came the sound. Knocking. Not random. Not desperate. Rhythmic. Measured. Intentional. Ezra grabbed Jonas by the shoulder. She's found a path. A fracture in the foundation. We have to close it now, or she'll crawl through. How? Jonas cried. Ezra pulled a flare gun from his belt. Fire. Salt. Blood. The old rules. But it was already too late. The turbine walls split, revealing another door. Wider. Wet. Breathing. And from it spilled figures, not creatures. Not people. Echoes. Shifting silhouettes that moved like memories through fog, each one wearing the faces of the group. Ezra. Silas. Jonas. Mara. All of them, but wrong. Twisted. Mouthless. With eyes that looked backward in time. The choice again. Jonas stood frozen. The real Mara grabbed his hand. We can't fight it, she said. Only contain it. How? She reached into her coat, pulling out Lucy's journal. We finished the ritual she started. Jonas stared. I don't know how. You don't need to know. She remembers. They turned toward the breach. The others were already being consumed, Silas falling to his knees, screaming as a version of himself split his jaw open. Ezra firing the flare into the mouth of one echo before being dragged into the doorway backward, feet last. Jonas opened the book and began to speak. The words. Not English. Not Latin. But something older than language, flowing like water across broken teeth. Each syllable stung his throat, burned his tongue. But the deep house heard. And the breach screamed. The walls shook. The floor bled. The echoes twisted, convulsed, and shattered into dust. The door began to close, but not fully. A hand reached through. Thin. Webbed. The color of ash and dusk. It gripped the frame. And for one moment, Jonas looked into her eye, the eye of the first current, the mother of thresholds, the sea made flesh. She smiled. I've seen your face. I'll wear it next time. Then she let go, and the door slammed shut. After, only Jonas and Mara survived. The station burned. The echoes were gone, but so was everyone else. They stood in the woods, watching the smoke rise, listening to the wind twist through the trees in that same three-note hum. Mara turned to him. She's not done. Jonas nodded. She never is. They thought they had escaped. Jonas and Mara walked for days, crossing mountains and abandoned rail lines, leaving behind the smoldering ruins of the hydro station. They didn't speak much. Words had become fragile. Sometimes, the wrong ones echoed too long. Sometimes, they didn't come back at all. But both of them felt it. The hollow. It wasn't a thing they could see. Not exactly. It was a presence. A sense. A shiver beneath thought, like a second heartbeat that didn't belong to either of them. Something had followed them out. A town with no name. They arrived at a small town that wasn't on any map. A dozen houses. A boarded-up gas station. A motel sign that still flickered the words, "Stay here," even though half the letters had fallen off. The locals were kind. Too kind. Jonas noticed at first, the way their smiles were just a little too wide. Their eyes didn't blink often enough. And they always said, "We're so glad you came," in the exact same tone. Like a script. The motel owner handed them a key. Room 11. The safest one, she whispered. It's furthest from the drain. Jonas didn't ask what that meant. Room 11. It smelled like mold and sea brine. The wallpaper peeled in long curls, revealing strange symbols beneath, like someone had etched spiral patterns directly into the drywall. Jonas lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. There it was again. 3 notes. Low. Repeating. Somewhere below the floorboards, the pipes pulsed with warmth. The sound of dripping water never stopped. Beside him, Mara sat with her knees pulled to her chest. She hadn't spoken since they arrived. She finally whispered, "She's in the plumbing." Jonas blinked. "What?" "The deep house," she said. "It's not a place anymore. It's an infection. A pressure behind reality. Water carries it. Memory carries it. Even language carries it." Jonas's mouth went dry. He remembered the whispering drains back in Anchor's Hollow. What happens if it spreads? He asked. Mara didn't look at him. It already has. The first incident. At 3:12 a.m., the woman in room 6 began screaming. Jonas and Mara ran out, along with the other guests. But the door was locked from the inside. The screams turned to gurgling. When Ezra and the handyman finally kicked it open, they found the woman kneeling in the bathtub, staring down at her own reflection in the water, which no longer matched her face. It blinked at them. Then the tub cracked in half, and black water poured out, carrying with it something pale and spined, like a snake made of fingernails. Jonas slammed the door shut. But he already knew. This was no longer about running. This was a slow blooming. The hollow test. Mara cut her palm that night. Not for ritual, but for confirmation. The blood was red, but it didn't fall. It coiled. Lifted. It's inside us now, she said softly. Like static. Like infection. Even our bodies remember her. Jonas said nothing. He could feel it too. The memories that weren't his. Faces he hadn't seen in years suddenly appearing in dreams. A lullaby his mother never sang, playing in his ears when the wind shifted. And when he looked in the mirror, sometimes, his reflection was smiling before he was. The hollow that follows. The townspeople changed first. They began walking the streets barefoot at night. One by one, they stopped answering questions. They just looked up at the sky, eyes wide, lips mouthing that same three-note pattern. Eventually, they stopped moving altogether. Just stood in doorways, in fields, in shallow puddles, waiting. Jonas and Mara decided to burn the motel. It didn't help. The fire burned hot, then turned blue, then vanished. The smoke didn't rise, it sank. Into the earth, into the cracks beneath the pavement. Jonas grabbed Mara's hand. We can't stop it here, he said. Where do we go? She asked. He looked to the map Lucy had given him long ago. Dozens of spirals. Most unreachable, but one glowed faintly. A place not yet breached. A chance. The reservoir near Dalat, Vietnam. Somewhere dry, Jonas said. Somewhere she hasn't drowned yet. The last passenger. They took a night bus. It was mostly empty. Just them, and an old man in the back wearing a thick coat and mirrored sunglasses, even though it was dark. Jonas felt uneasy. Halfway through the ride, the man leaned forward. You carry her, he rasped. But she hasn't taken root yet. Jonas froze. She'll make you choose again, you know, the man continued. Vessel or door? Who are you? Jonas asked. The man grinned. And for a moment, Jonas saw that his tongue was shaped like a spiral. The bus left them just outside Dalat. A fog clung to the trees, not like the sea mist of Anchor's Hollow, but colder, drier. Still, Jonas could feel it, the pressure. The low hum of something beneath the land, like a throat clearing softly in the roots of the mountains. Dalat was alive with sound. Scooters. Vendors. Laughter. But underneath it all, there was something offbeat. A rhythm that didn't match human life. It pulsed beneath manhole covers, hummed behind power boxes, reverberated from fountains. Jonas felt it in his bones. The deep house was listening. The reservoir. They reached the reservoir by foot, a wide, mirror-still body of water cradled in the hills. It looked harmless. But Jonas could see the way birds avoided it, could hear how no frogs croaked at the edges. And Mara stood still at the shoreline, head tilted like she was hearing something the rest of the world couldn't. What is it? He asked. She didn't blink. It's awake. The old man. They met him by chance, in a tea shop near the edge of town, tucked under a building that leaned just a little too far to the left. He wore a sun hat and sunglasses. Spoke perfect English. He introduced himself only as Thay Ninh. You've seen her, he said without preamble. Jonas stiffened. Mara didn't look up. I know that look, the man continued. The way your ears twitch at quiet frequencies. The way your shadows lag half a second behind. He poured them tea. It smelled of jasmine and rust. She came once before. 1979, when the dam cracked and the water rose too fast. Jonas leaned in. And the old man smiled, not kindly. They thought it was an engineering failure. It wasn't. It was her testing the walls of the world. Tunnels. That night, Thay Ninh took them to the old city beneath the city, a lattice of war tunnels and forgotten bunkers left from generations of conflict. Tourists were no longer allowed in. But it hadn't stopped something else from crawling back down there. The walls dripped. Not with water, with condensation that moved. Patterns of moisture that spelled symbols Jonas had seen before. Spirals. Eyes, teeth without mouths. She wants to learn language, Mara whispered. She's watching how we shape sound. How we tie meaning to memory. Jonas turned sharply. You said that before. Mara blinked. No, she said slowly. I didn't. Echo children. They found them on the 3rd level. 4 of them. Children with blank eyes and gill-like scars along their necks. They were playing a game of hopscotch drawn in blood, humming something beneath their breath. 3 notes. Always 3. When one of the children saw Jonas, she smiled and whispered. Did you bring the key? What key? He asked. The girl giggled. The one you swallowed. In Anchor's Hollow. The one made of memory. Mara grabbed his arm. We need to go. But the girl wasn't done. She doesn't need the sea anymore, she whispered. She has pipes. She has drains. She has us. The realization. Later, Jonas sat on the edge of the reservoir while Mara stared at the stars. Do you hear it now? She asked. He nodded. The water hummed. Not a vibration, a voice. She was whispering through the infrastructure. Pipes, tunnels, faucets, irrigation. Not just here, everywhere. She doesn't need oceans, Jonas said. She's in the systems. In the things we built to carry water. Mara spoke without turning. And she's using them to carry memory. Jonas's heart dropped. The deep house wasn't moving. It was rooting. Not to destroy the world, but to rebuild it in her shape. The conduit. They returned to the city to find it had already begun. People stood still in the streets. Phones buzzed in pockets, not with calls, but with that same three-note frequency. Screens flickered with static that held faces, half-formed, watching. Jonas tried to call for help. The signal was clear. Too clear. Every line he dialed answered with, "You've opened the door. Now speak." And that's when he realized he had been speaking for her all along. Every scream, every memory, every time he told someone else about her, he had spread her story, her design. Language was the real infection, and he was patient zero. Jonas stood in the middle of the street, surrounded by silence. But it was the wrong kind of silence. Not absence. Containment. The people of the Lat had stopped speaking. Their mouths hung open. Soundless. Waiting. The city lights pulsed in time with a rhythm not made by hands or machines, but by her voice, rising in frequency just beneath the range of human hearing. It stirred water in pipes. It shifted ink on paper. It echoed from the deepest cracks in the earth. She was no longer just a memory. She was becoming language. And Jonas was the conduit. The first voice. He tried to scream, but nothing came out. Not air. Not sound. Only a low vibration in his jaw, like something trying to hum through his bones. Beside him, Mara collapsed to her knees, eyes wide. "She's in me," she whispered. "She's using my lungs." Jonas dropped beside her, held her trembling frame. "Fight it. I'm trying. She's speaking through us." "No," Mara said, looking at him through glassy tears. "She's learning through us." The spiral inside. That night, Jonas had the dream again. He stood at the center of the world, not a city, not a forest, not a sea. Just a mouth. A circular chasm stretching into infinity, lined with teeth made of faces he'd known. Lucy. Ezra. Silas. Bishop. His father. And from its depths came her voice, rising now, fully formed. "I was never born. I am the first sentence. The first prayer. The first scream." He looked down. His body was gone. Only language remained. Floating letters. Thoughts made shape. And she was pulling them apart, rewriting them. Reconstructing the grammar of his soul. The final door. He awoke gasping. Mara was already awake, eyes locked on something outside the window. In the center of the reservoir, a structure had risen overnight. Spiraled. Towering. Not built. Remembered. The door, the real one, was now wide open. Light poured from it, pale and fluid, carrying images and words and memories that weren't anyone's, but still felt real. Jonas stood, the journal Lucy had given him now dripping ink onto the floor, its pages empty. Everything he'd written, she had absorbed. And now, she wanted more. The climb. They crossed the flooded streets, wading through whispers. No one stopped them. The people weren't really there anymore. Only echoes. Their bodies preserved, but their souls repurposed into syllables. Sentences. Grammar in her gospel. They reached the base of the tower. It wasn't made of stone or bone. It was made of text. Spirals of language, twisting upward, every word Jonas had ever spoken, etched into the walls. "It's a temple," Mara whispered. "No," Jonas said. "It's a mouth." They began to climb. The choice. At the top, the door awaited. Beyond it, nothing human remained. Only fluid thought. Unspoken time. The library of everything that had been forgotten by the world, and everything it was about to become. Jonas felt her presence behind him. Inside him. "You carried me well," she said. "But now you must choose." He saw two paths. One led inward, where he would become her vessel, speaking her name until language cracked and the world reshaped into her cathedral. The other led downward, a leap into silence. Into non-language. A sacrifice of every memory, every word, every part of his self, to close the door forever. He turned to Mara. She was crying. "She wants to be born. Through us." Jonas stepped toward the edge. Mara reached for him. "Wait," she said. He looked back. "If you go," she whispered, "don't let her speak again." Jonas nodded and jumped. Silence. The water swallowed him whole. But it wasn't wet. It was wordless. It stripped away language, thought, meaning, until all that remained was the shape of silence. And then it sealed. After, the lat returned to normal. Mostly, the waterline receded. The tower was never found. Most of the town claimed nothing had ever happened. But sometimes, when the wind is just right, and the drains gurgle after a storm, a three-note hum can be heard beneath the streets. And those who hear it dream in words they don't understand. Final page. Somewhere, in a house no one lives in anymore, lies a journal. The last page has only one sentence written in trembling ink. You can't drown a voice that was born before the sea. The end. Or the first word of something else.